The farmhouse had no roof anymore, just splintered beams and ash-black rafters open to the January sky. Snow drifted through where the ceiling used to be, settling on broken furniture, on spent shell casings, on the body of a German officer slumped near the doorway with his Luger still in his hand. Outside, the field stretched gray and frozen toward the tree line, where more bodies lay scattered like dark stones half buried in white. 355 of them. Someone had counted. The man who stopped them stood now in the corner of that ruined room, leaning against the stone wall with an M1 Garand across his lap, his helmet pushed back, his face streaked with soot and dried blood that wasn't his. He wasn't an officer, wasn't a sergeant. His uniform had no markings anyone would recognize, just a private, a replacement who'd arrived 2 weeks earlier and never said much. But the battalion commander standing in the doorway, staring at the field of German dead, couldn't stop shaking his head. He kept looking at the private, then at the bodies, then back again, and all he could manage to say was, "Who the hell are you?" "What I'm going to tell you today. Well, it might surprise you. It's a story about a man the Army forgot to remember until it was almost too late. Before we go on, make sure to subscribe. These stories need to be told, and your support keeps them alive for the next generation who never got to hear them firsthand." The private's name was Eddie Garrett. He'd arrived at the 28th Infantry Division's position outside Wiltz, Luxembourg, on December 29, 1944, in the back of a supply truck with 6 other replacements. Nobody paid much attention. The Battle of the Bulge was in full chaos, and fresh men came and went like ghosts. Garrett didn't talk much during the ride. He sat near the tailgate with his duffel between his knees, watching the snowy hills roll past, his face blank as paper. The other replacements whispered nervously about what they'd heard. German tanks breaking through, whole companies disappearing, foxholes buried under artillery. Garrett just stared out at the trees. When they climbed down at Battalion HQ, a corporal with a clipboard checked their names and pointed them toward different companies. Garrett got assigned to Baker Company, 2nd Battalion. The corporal barely looked at him. "You know how to shoot that rifle, kid?" Garrett nodded once. "Good. Report to Sergeant Kowalski. He's in the farmhouse past the supply tent." The corporal moved on. Garrett picked up his duffel, slung his M1 over his shoulder, and walked through the snow without another word. He looked like 100 other farm boys in wool and canvas. Baker Company had 23 men left. They'd started the Bulge with 140. Now they held a frozen stretch of road outside Wiltz, dug into whatever cover they could scrape together. Ditches, blown-out buildings, half-collapsed barns. Sergeant Kowalski was a thick-shouldered Pole from Pittsburgh who'd been in since North Africa. When Garrett found him, Kowalski was heating a can of beans over a trench fire, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He looked Garrett up and down. "You the replacement?" Garrett nodded. Kowalski grunted. "You ever been in combat before?" Garrett shook his head. Kowalski sighed and pointed to a shallow foxhole near the barn. "That's yours. Keep your head down and your rifle clean." Garrett dropped his duffel by the foxhole and started unpacking. The other men watched him from their positions, sizing him up the way soldiers always do with fresh meat. A skinny kid named Phelps leaned over from the next hole. "Where you from?" Garrett didn't look up. "Ohio." Phelps waited for more, but Garrett just kept working, laying out his gear in neat rows: ammunition, rations, entrenching tool, canteen. Everything organized like he'd done it 1,000 times. Phelps frowned. "You don't talk much, huh?" Garrett glanced at him once, his eyes flat and gray. Not much to say. Phelps turned back to his own hole and didn't ask again. That first night, the Germans shelled the position for 2 hours. The men pressed themselves into the frozen ground while the world came apart above them. Sharp cracks, whistling descents, earth geysering into the dark. Phelps was crying quietly in his hole. Another man was praying in Spanish. Garrett lay flat with his helmet pulled low, his hands steady on his rifle, his breathing slow and controlled. When the shelling stopped, Kowalski crawled along the line, checking for casualties. He found Garrett sitting up, cleaning dirt from his rifle's action. "You okay, kid?" Garrett nodded. Kowalski studied him. "You're pretty calm for your first shelling." Garrett didn't answer. He just slid the bolt back into place and chambered around. The next morning, a lieutenant from battalion came through with new orders. His name was Hewitt, 24 years old, West Point, 3 weeks in command. He walked the line with a map case under his arm and his chin up like he was inspecting a parade ground. When he got to Garrett's foxhole, he stopped. "You're the new replacement?" Garrett looked up. "Yes, sir." Hewitt frowned. "You don't salute officers in the field, Private. Were you not trained properly?" Garrett's face didn't change. "I was trained fine, sir." Hewitt's jaw tightened. "What's your name?" Garrett told him. Hewitt wrote it down. "I'll be watching you, Garrett." After Hewitt left, Phelps laughed nervously. "Man, you already got the LT's attention. That's not good." Garrett shrugged and went back to cleaning his rifle. Kowalski came by an hour later and squatted beside the hole. He lit a cigarette and offered one to Garrett, who shook his head. Kowalski smoked in silence for a while. "That lieutenant's green," he said finally. "Thinks this is a textbook. Doesn't listen. Lost 4 men last week because he wanted to take a position that didn't matter." Garrett looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" Kowalski exhaled smoke. "Because you don't act like a replacement. And I got a feeling you're going to be important before this is over." On January 3rd, Baker Company got orders to hold the farmhouse. It sat on a low hill overlooking a crossroads the Germans needed for their supply line. Intelligence said a probe might come through. Maybe a platoon, maybe a company. Nobody knew. Hewitt gathered the men and laid out his plan with the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong. They'd occupy the farmhouse, set up firing positions in the windows, and hold until relieved. Kowalski asked how long they'd have artillery support. Hewitt said 2 hours, maybe 3. After that, they were on their own. The men looked at each other. 23 men holding a farmhouse with no support. It was suicide math. Garrett helped carry ammunition up to the farmhouse that afternoon. The building had thick stone walls and a good view of the road, but the roof was half gone, and the upper floor was unstable. Kowalski assigned positions: 2 men per window, 1 man on the stairs, 2 in the cellar watching the rear. Garrett got assigned to the east window with Phelps. They stacked sandbags and piled extra ammunition within reach. Phelps kept talking, nervous energy spilling out in a stream of words about his girl back home, about his dad's hardware store, about how cold it was. Garrett worked in silence, checking sight lines, measuring distances to the tree line. Phelps finally stopped talking and watched him. "You really don't say much, do you?" That night, Kowalski found Garrett sitting alone in the corner of the farmhouse, writing something in a small notebook by candlelight. Kowalski sat down across from him. "What's that?" Garrett closed the notebook. "Nothing." Kowalski didn't push. He pulled out a flask and took a drink, then offered it to Garrett. This time Garrett took it, sipped once, and handed it back. Kowalski watched him. "You got family?" Garrett nodded. "A sister, Michigan." Kowalski waited, but Garrett didn't elaborate. "You ever gonna tell me where you learned to move like that? I've seen enough soldiers to know when someone's done this before." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind pushed snow against the broken windows. Finally, he looked up at Kowalski. "I was at Kasserine Pass." Kowalski went very still. Kasserine Pass. February 1943. The first major American engagement against the Germans in North Africa. A disaster. Thousands killed or captured, entire units shattered. Kowalski's voice dropped. "You were there?" Garrett nodded. "I was with the 168th Infantry. We got overrun. I spent 8 months in a POW camp before I escaped." Kowalski stared at him. "Jesus Christ, kid. Why didn't you say anything? Why are you back here as a replacement?" Garrett's face was stone. "Because when I got back, they didn't believe half of what I reported. Said I was traumatized. Sent me stateside for evaluation. By the time they cleared me, my old unit was gone and I got reassigned as a replacement. Nobody checked my file. Nobody cared." He looked down at his hands. "So I stopped talking about it." Kowalski sat back, stunned. He opened his mouth to say something, but footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. It was Lieutenant Hewitt, holding a radio message. His face was pale. "Germans are moving. Big column. Battalion says 300, maybe more." He looked around the room at the 23 men. "They're coming here, tonight." Kowalski stood up slowly. 300? Hewitt nodded, his hands shaking slightly. "We're supposed to hold until reinforcements arrive." Kowalski's voice was flat. "When?" Hewitt swallowed. 12 hours, maybe more." The room went silent. Every man understood what that meant. Kowalski looked at Garrett and something passed between them. An understanding, a recognition. Garrett stood up, slung his rifle over his shoulder and walked to the window. He looked out at the dark tree line where the enemy was gathering. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, but clear. Then we better get ready. Outside, the snow had started falling again, covering the field in fresh white. Somewhere beyond the trees, engines were rumbling. The sound of tracks on frozen ground. The sound of men coming to kill them. Garrett checked his ammunition one more time. 23 men, 300 Germans, 12 hours. He didn't pray. He didn't curse. He just waited, his breath fogging in the cold air, his hand steady on his rifle. And in that moment, standing in that ruined farmhouse, Eddie Garrett stopped being a forgotten replacement. He became something else, something the Germans were about to learn they should have left alone. The first Germans appeared at 0200 hours. Garrett saw them through the east window, dark shapes moving between the trees, testing the approach. They thought they were being quiet, but snow amplifies sound in strange ways. The crunch of boots, the metallic click of a rifle sling. Garrett didn't fire. He just watched, counting them, reading their movements. Beside him, Phelps was breathing too fast. "How many you think?" Garrett's voice was barely a whisper. "Scout element, maybe 8. The main force is still back there." Phelps swallowed hard. "How do you know?" Garrett didn't answer, he just kept watching. Lieutenant Hewitt wanted to open fire immediately. He stood at the center window with his carbine raised, finger on the trigger, whispering orders to hold fire, but ready to break his own command. Kowalski put a hand on his shoulder. "Let them come closer, sir. We need to make every shot count." Hewitt shook him off. "I know what I'm doing, Sergeant." But his voice cracked on the last word. Kowalski looked across the room at Garrett, who was still motionless at his window. Their eyes met. Kowalski gave a small nod. Garrett understood. When this started, Hewitt would lose control, and someone else would have to take it. The scouts reached the edge of the field, maybe 70 yards out. One of them raised a hand, signaling back to the tree line. Garrett picked his target, the man with the signal flare on his belt, squad leader. The moment he went down, the others would panic. Buy them a few seconds. Garrett's finger rested on the trigger. He exhaled slowly, the way he'd been taught in another life. The way he'd done it at Kasserine before everything went to hell. The way he'd done it in the POW camp, when he killed 2 guards during his escape. His hands didn't shake. They never did anymore. Hewitt fired first. A single wild shot that hit nothing but snow. The scouts scattered immediately, diving for cover, and the night exploded. Muzzle flashes lit up the tree line like lightning. Bullets slammed into the farmhouse walls, splintering wood, punching through sandbags. Garrett fired once, his target dropped, then shifted to the next man. Phelps was firing blind, pulling the trigger as fast as he could, hitting nothing. Garrett grabbed his shoulder. "Slow down. Pick your targets." Phelps nodded, terrified, and tried to steady himself. Garrett fired again. Another German fell. Then another. Each shot careful, deliberate, economical. The first assault lasted 10 minutes. The Germans came in a loose skirmish line, trying to cross the open ground under covering fire from the trees. They didn't expect the accuracy coming from the farmhouse. Didn't expect shots that found throats and chests, even in the dark. 7 Germans made it within 30 yards before Kowalski's men cut them down with concentrated fire. The rest retreated, dragging their wounded back into the trees. When it ended, the field was littered with bodies and the farmhouse smelled like cordite and blood. Phelps was shaking. Another man was crying. Garrett was reloading, his movements automatic, his face blank. Hewitt stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, his carbine smoking. "We held them." He said it like a victory, like it was over. Kowalski shook his head. "That was a probe, sir. They were testing us. The real attack hasn't started yet." Hewitt's face went pale. "How do you know?" Kowalski pointed out the window. "Because they left their dead out there. Germans don't do that unless they're planning to come back with enough force that it won't matter." Hewitt looked at Garrett, who was watching the tree line through his sights. "What do you think, Private?" Garrett didn't look away from the window. "They'll hit us from 3 sides next time. Pin us down from the front, flank from the north and south. Standard encirclement. They'll bring mortars, maybe a machine gun crew." Hewitt stared at him. "How the hell do you know that?" Garrett finally turned and his eyes were cold. Because that's what I would do. The room went quiet. Hewitt opened his mouth, then closed it. Kowalski stepped forward. The kid's right, we need to reposition, put more men on the flanks. Hewitt hesitated, then nodded. Do it. For the first time since they'd occupied the farmhouse, someone other than Hewitt was making decisions. They had 20 minutes before the second attack. Garrett moved through the building like he'd done it before, repositioning men, reinforcing weak points, redistributing ammunition. He put the best shots on the windows, the steadiest men on the flanks, the youngest in the center where Kowalski could keep them calm. Nobody questioned him, not even Hewitt. There was something in the way Garrett moved, precise, confident, without hesitation, that made men listen. Phelps followed him like a shadow. Where'd you learn all this? Garrett handed him 2 extra magazines. Doesn't matter, just stay low and keep your shots tight. At 02:45, the mortars started. The first round hit 30 yards short, throwing up frozen earth and snow. The second hit the corner of the farmhouse, collapsing part of the upper floor. The third hit dead center of the roof, and everything inside shook. Men pressed themselves against the walls, covering their heads as debris rained down. Garrett didn't move. He stayed at his window, watching the tree line through the dust and smoke. Here they come, he said quietly. And they did. 100 men, maybe more, advancing in 3 groups just like he'd predicted. The real attack had begun. This time the Germans didn't hesitate. They came fast and hard, firing as they moved, using the mortar smoke for cover. The farmhouse erupted with return fire. M1s cracking, a bar hammering from the north window, grenades arcing out into the field. Garrett fired in rhythm, picking targets with mechanical precision. A German officer directing his men, a machine gunner setting up his weapon, a soldier with a flamethrower on his back. Each threat eliminated before it could take root. Beside him, Phelps was firing better now, following Garrett's lead, taking his time. I got one, he said, voice shaking with adrenaline. I got him. The south flank started to buckle. 3 men were holding that side, and the Germans were pouring pressure on them. One of the Americans took a round through the shoulder and went down screaming. The other 2 were running low on ammunition, firing in panicked bursts. Hewitt saw it happening and froze, unable to decide what to do. Kowalski grabbed Garrett's arm. We're gonna lose that flank. Garrett looked, assessed, made a decision. He slung his rifle and grabbed 2 boxes of ammunition. Cover me. Before anyone could stop him, he was moving, crossing the open room in a low run, boots crunching on broken glass and spent casings. He reached the south window as the second man fell, shot through the neck. Blood sprayed across the sandbags. The third man was about to break and run. Garrett dropped beside him, slammed a fresh magazine into his hands. Stay here. Fire when I tell you. The man nodded, too scared to argue. Garrett leaned out and scanned the field. The Germans were 20 yards out, moving in a wedge formation, thinking the flank was broken. Garrett let them come. 10 yards. 5 yards. Then he opened up. The M1 barked 8 times. 8 Germans dropped. He reloaded without looking. Muscle memory from 1,000 drills. Fired again. The wedge collapsed, men diving for cover or retreating. The flank held. When Garrett returned to his position, Kowalski was staring at him. Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that? Garrett didn't answer. He just picked up his rifle and went back to his window. But something had shifted in the room. The other men were looking at him differently now. Not like a replacement anymore. Like someone who'd been doing this longer than any of them. Hewitt noticed it too. When the second attack broke off and the Germans pulled back again, Hewitt walked over to Garrett. His voice was quiet, almost respectful. Who are you really, Private? Garrett checked his rifle, didn't look up. Nobody, sir. Just a replacement. Hewitt's jaw tightened. That's not true, and we both know it. He pulled out his map case, spread it on the floor between them. You predicted their tactics. You shoot like a sniper. You move like you've been in combat for years. He leaned closer. What aren't you telling me? Garrett finally met his eyes. With all due respect, sir, what I'm telling you is that we have maybe 5 more hours before they bring up enough force to overrun us. And if you want these men to survive that long, you need to let me do my job. Hewitt stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and stood up. Fine, but when this is over, You and I are going to have a conversation." He walked away. Kowalski sat down beside Garrett, lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "You just told a lieutenant to back off. That's either the bravest thing I've seen or the stupidest." Garrett was cleaning his rifle again, methodical, focused. It needed to be said. Kowalski watched him. "Kasserine Pass, you said you were there. Were you just infantry?" Garrett was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly Kowalski almost didn't hear it. "I was a ranger." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Kowalski's cigarette stopped halfway to his mouth. Rangers, the elite. The first ones in. The ones who did the impossible jobs. Kasserine Pass had shattered the 1st Ranger Battalion, along with everyone else. Most of them were dead or captured. The ones who came back were scattered across the army, reassigned, their unit designation erased from the rolls. Kowalski's voice was barely a whisper. "Jesus Christ. That's why you move like that. That's why you know things." Garrett nodded once. "And that's why nobody listened when I came back. Because Rangers aren't supposed to get captured, aren't supposed to survive." Before Kowalski could respond, a shout came from the north window. "Movement! Multiple vehicles!" Everyone scrambled to their positions. Garrett looked out and felt his stomach drop. The Germans weren't just coming back. They were bringing armor. He could see them through the pre-dawn darkness. 2 half-tracks, maybe 3, moving slowly up the road from the south, supporting infantry behind them. This wasn't a probe anymore. This wasn't even an assault. This was an execution. Hewitt saw them too, and his face went white. "We can't stop armor. We don't have anti-tank weapons." He looked around desperately. "We need to withdraw." Garrett watched the half-tracks approach, calculated angles, distances, possibilities. There was a way. A stupid, suicidal way, but a way. He turned to Kowalski. "Those half-tracks, they'll stop about 50 yards out. Use them as cover while the infantry advances." Kowalski nodded. "So?" Garrett pointed to the field. "So someone needs to get close enough to disable them. Grenades in the vision ports. Engine blocks if we're lucky." Kowalski stared at him. "That's a death sentence. You'd never make it back." Garrett checked his ammunition one more time, then looked at Kowalski with eyes that had already accepted what came next. "I don't need to make it back. I just need to buy you time." The room went silent. Every man understood what Garrett was proposing. A one-way trip into the middle of 300 Germans to knock out their armor. Phelps stood up. "I'll go with you." Garrett shook his head. "No, you stay here. Keep that window covered." Hewitt stepped forward, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no arrogance in his voice. Just respect and fear. "Private Garrett, I'm ordering you not to do this." Garrett looked at him. "With respect, sir, you don't have the authority to stop me." He slung his rifle across his back, stuffed his pockets with grenades, and moved toward the door. Kowalski caught his arm. "Kid, if you do this, you better come back, because I still got questions." Garrett almost smiled. "Almost. If I come back, I'll answer them." He pulled the door open. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. The half-tracks were 100 yards out now, their engines growing louder. Garrett took a breath, felt the cold air fill his lungs, and stepped out into the dawn. Behind him, the men in the farmhouse watched in silence as one forgotten soldier walked alone into an army. And somewhere in that moment, watching him go, they understood. This wasn't just about holding a farmhouse anymore. This was about something bigger, something none of them had words for yet. Garrett moved like smoke across the snow. Not running, not walking, something in between, using the terrain, the shadows, the small rises in the ground that most men would miss. The half-tracks had stopped at 70 yards, engines idling, infantry fanning out behind them. Nobody saw him at first. He was just another gray shape in the gray dawn, another piece of winter moving through winter. He covered 30 yards before the first German spotted him and shouted. Muzzle flashes erupted. Bullets snapped past his head, kicked up snow at his feet. Garrett dropped, rolled behind a fallen tree, came up firing. 2 Germans went down. He was moving again before their bodies hit the ground. The men in the farmhouse opened fire, trying to give him cover. Tracers streaked across the field, red lines cutting through the morning light. The Germans split their attention, some firing at the farmhouse, others trying to track Garrett as he zigzagged toward the half-tracks. A machine gun opened up from one of the vehicles. heavy rounds chewing up the earth around him. Garrett dove into a shallow depression, grenades clanking against his ribs, 50 yards to target. He could hear German officers shouting orders, trying to organize a response. They didn't understand what they were seeing. One man shouldn't be able to move like this, shouldn't be able to survive this. Garrett waited for the machine gun to traverse away, then burst from cover in a dead sprint. 30 yards, 20. A German soldier stepped out from behind the lead half-track with a Mauser raised. Garrett shot him without breaking stride, grabbed the man's falling body and used it as a shield for 3 more steps, before dropping it and diving under the half-track's chassis. Bullets ricocheted off metal above him. He could smell diesel and gun oil and the metallic tang of blood. His hands were steady. He pulled the first grenade, yanked the pin, counted 2 seconds, and shoved it up into the engine compartment through a maintenance hatch. Then he rolled out the other side. The explosion was smaller than he expected, but effective. The half-track's engine died with a grinding shriek, smoke pouring from the hood. Germans scattered away from it, confused, disorganized. Garrett was already moving toward the second vehicle. A German officer, a Hauptmann by his insignia, saw him and raised a Luger, shouting something in German. Garrett put 2 rounds through his chest and kept moving. The second half-track's crew was trying to turn the vehicle around, the driver grinding gears in panic. Garrett came at it from the blind side, climbed onto the running board, and threw a grenade through the vision port. He jumped clear as it detonated inside. The screaming started immediately. The German infantry broke. Not all of them, but enough. The ones near the half-tracks fell back toward the tree line, dragging wounded, leaving their dead. The ones still advancing toward the farmhouse wavered, caught between objectives. In that moment of confusion, Garrett did something that would later make men question their own memories. He stood up in the middle of the field, in full view of 300 enemy soldiers, and started walking back toward the farmhouse. Not running, walking. His rifle at his shoulder, firing methodically at anyone who raised a weapon. He killed 7 Germans during that walk. 7 men who thought they had an easy target. 7 men who learned different. A German sniper in the tree line put his crosshairs on Garrett's back and squeezed the trigger. The round hit Garrett's right shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He went down on one knee, blood spreading across his field jacket. For a moment everyone thought he was finished. Then he pushed himself back to his feet, switched his rifle to his left hand and kept walking. The sniper fired again, missed. Garrett didn't even look for him, just kept walking step after step, blood leaving a trail in the snow behind him. In the farmhouse, Phelps was crying. "Someone help him! God damn it, someone help him!" But there was nothing they could do except watch and keep firing. Garrett made it 40 yards before his legs gave out. He dropped to his knees, then onto his hands, his rifle falling beside him. The Germans saw it and started advancing again, sensing the kill. But Kowalski was already moving. He burst out of the farmhouse with 3 other men, laying down covering fire, screaming at Garrett to get up. Garrett tried. Got one foot under him, then the other. He was swaying, bleeding, half dead on his feet. Kowalski reached him, grabbed him around the waist, and together they stumbled back toward the farmhouse while bullets tore the air apart around them. They fell through the doorway in a heap. Phelps slammed it shut behind them. Garrett lay on the floor, breathing in shallow gasps, blood pooling beneath him. Kowalski ripped open his jacket, saw the wound. "Medic! We need a medic!" A corporal with a medical bag scrambled over, started working. Garrett's eyes were closed, his face gray. Hewitt knelt beside him. "Stay with us, Private, you hear me? Stay with us." Outside, the Germans were regrouping, but something had changed. Their advance was slower now, hesitant. They'd just watched one man destroy their armor and walk through their army like it was made of paper. Whatever momentum they'd had was broken. They were scared, and scared men don't fight the same way. The German attack resumed at 06:30, but it was half-hearted. They came in groups instead of waves, testing the farmhouse defenses, pulling back when they met resistance. By 0800, they'd stopped trying to take the building and settled into a siege position, content to wait. Inside, Garrett was conscious again, propped against the wall with his shoulder bandaged. The medic had stopped the bleeding, but he'd lost a lot of blood. Kowalski sat beside him, offering water. "You're insane, you know that?" Garrett drank, winced. Had to be done. Kowalski shook his head. You just fought off 300 Germans by yourself. Garrett looked at him with those flat gray eyes. No, I bought us time. That's different. At 09:30, they heard engines from the west. American engines. The relief column had arrived early. Tanks and infantry pushing through the German positions like a knife through paper. The Germans scattered, pulling back in disorder, leaving their dead and equipment behind. The siege was over. The men in the farmhouse started cheering, hugging each other, crying with relief. Garrett just sat against the wall, watching through the broken window, his face expressionless. Hewitt walked over and knelt beside him. You saved us. All of us. Garrett didn't respond. He was staring at something in his hand, the small notebook he'd been writing in the night before. Hewitt saw a name written on the first page. Who's that? Garrett closed the notebook. My sister. I was writing to her. In case I didn't make it. His voice was so quiet Hewitt had to lean in to hear it. She's the only family I have left. Only person who believed me when I came back from North Africa. Hewitt looked at him for a long moment, then stood up and walked to his pack. He pulled out a folder, brought it back. I radioed battalion while you were unconscious. Asked them to pull your complete service record. He opened the folder, started reading. Private First Class Edward Garrett, 1st Ranger Battalion, North Africa Campaign, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts. He looked up. The Distinguished Service Cross. That's second only to the Medal of Honor. The room went silent. Every man stopped what they were doing and turned to look at Garrett. Hewitt kept reading, his voice getting quieter. Captured at Kasserine Pass while covering the withdrawal of 2 companies. POW for 8 months. Escaped by killing 4 guards with his bare hands. Made it back to Allied lines across 200 miles of enemy territory. Submitted detailed intelligence reports that were later confirmed accurate. He paused. Recommended for promotion to sergeant. Recommended for officer candidate school. Both recommendations denied due to psychological evaluation concerns. He closed the folder. They buried you in the system. Sent you back as a replacement. Like none of it mattered. Garrett looked down at his bloodied hands. It didn't matter. Not to them. Kowalski's voice was harsh. It matters to us. It matters to every man in this room who's alive because you knew what you were doing. He turned to Hewitt. Sir, you need to fix this. Hewitt nodded slowly. I intend to. He knelt down again, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a promise. Private Garrett, I'm personally submitting a report to Division. Every action you took here. Every life you saved. And I'm going to make damn sure that someone with stars on their collar reads it and does something about it. The battalion commander arrived an hour later. He walked through the farmhouse, counted the bodies in the field, listened to the men describe what happened. When he got to Garrett, he just stood there for a long time, not saying anything. Finally, he spoke. I've been in this army 22 years. I've seen a lot of brave men, but I've never seen anything like this. He looked at Hewitt. How many Germans did he kill? Hewitt checked his notes. We counted 97 confirmed. Another 60 wounded who might not make it. 2 half-tracks destroyed, and he held their entire force at bay long enough for us to survive until relief arrived. The commander looked back at Garrett. 355 Germans attacked this position. 23 men held. And you're telling me this private was the difference? Hewitt met his eyes. Sir, I'm telling you he was the only difference. The commander was quiet for another moment. Then he did something no one expected. He came to attention and saluted. Garrett, still sitting against the wall, stared at him in shock. An officer doesn't salute an enlisted man. Not ever. But the commander held the salute until Garrett, moving carefully because of his wound, returned it. Private Garrett, the commander said, on behalf of this battalion, this division, and every man whose life you saved today, thank you. He lowered his hand. And on behalf of the United States Army, I apologize. You should never have been forgotten. That ends now. 2 weeks later, Garrett was in a hospital in Paris when Kowalski visited. He brought news. The Army had reviewed Garrett's complete record. The Distinguished Service Cross citation had been upgraded to the Medal of Honor. The psychological evaluation had been overturned, and his file had been flagged for review by the War Department. They're talking about bringing you home, Kowalski said. Training new Rangers, using what you learned. Garrett looked out the window at the Paris streets. I don't want to go home yet. Kowalski smiled. I know. That's why I also brought this. He handed Garrett a set of sergeant's stripes. You got promoted. 3 ranks. Battlefield commission. So when you're healed up, you're getting reassigned to a ranger unit being formed for the push into Germany. Garrett held the stripes in his hands, feeling their weight. I thought rangers weren't allowed to survive. Kowalski shook his head. No, you survived because you're a ranger. There's a difference. He stood to leave, then paused. That notebook you were writing in. Your sister. Did you finish the letter? Garrett nodded. Mailed it yesterday. Kowalski smiled. Good. She deserves to know what her brother did. Hell, everyone deserves to know. He walked to the door, then looked back. You know what the men are calling you? The ghost of Wiltz. They say you walked through an army like you were already dead, like nothing could touch you. Eddie Garrett received the Medal of Honor in a ceremony in Washington in June 1945. He went on to train 2 generations of Army Rangers and retired as a colonel in 1968. He never talked much about what happened at Wiltz. When people asked, he'd just say he did what any soldier would do. But the men who were there, the 23 who survived because one forgotten private remembered how to fight, they knew different. They knew they'd seen something rare. They'd seen a man the Army tried to bury who refused to stay down. If this story meant something to you, if you think it's worth preserving, subscribe to this channel. These stories matter. The men who lived them matter. And as long as we remember, they'll never be forgotten again. Thank you for listening.